Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, we'll see how Proposition 123 money is now going into Arizona schools. Also tonight, why more people are turning to social media for news content. And we'll meet the author of a new book on America's unique relationship with the coyote. Those stories next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. A state lawmaker today pleaded not guilty to charges of welfare fraud. Representative Cece Velasquez, a Democrat from Litchfield Park, was arraigned on 3 felony counts of fraudulently using $1,700 worth of food stamps. Velasquez released a statement saying that she's anxious to have her day in court. Her next court date, a pretrial conference, is set for August 17th. Arizona schools are starting to receive increased payments from the State Land Trust by way of the recently approved Proposition 123, which helps settle the lawsuit over inflation-adjusted funding. Joining us now is Jeremy Calles, Chief Financial Officer at the Kyrene Elementary School District. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Prop 123 cash, when exactly did it start coming in?
Well, Ted, that's a good thing about having a special election in May is that the cash is actually available to us now. By having the special election in May, we're able to start getting that funding for the 15-16 school year, which is the school year we just completed. So we've got those funds in, as well as over the course of the next 12 months, as we get our payments for the current school year, we'll also start to receive the next payment on that.
So as far as the money, just logistically, how is the money presented to the district?
Well, it's all available for the first payment. It's all available all at once. Districts actually work off of budget capacity, so when you know what your total funding is going to be for the entire year, it's basically like all that funding is available to you at the beginning of the year. So the money for last year as well as the money for this year is available to school districts now. They can start spending it now. They make plans for how to spend that money based on that. They weren't forced to spend last year's money in last year's budget, though. All of that could roll forward, so that way it'd give them more time to plan and determine the best course of action on how to use those funds.
So basically you got an entire year's worth in one lump sum? Is that what I'm hearing here?
Yes, the whole first year would have came in one lump sum. Now some districts decided because of that to go ahead and implement some compensation increases for last year. And give employees who may be not even continuing this year, to give them some increases last year, just because of all the salary freezes and everything else employees have had to endure during this entire time where the state stopped funding for inflation.
Indeed. So last year, one lump sum. When does now the next payment hit for the current year?
It'll start to come in. We get 12 payments over the course of the year, so it'll start to come in and be broken out and prorated over those payments.
So not a lump sum for that?
No.
Okay. Is it still, for this money, is it still tied to enrollment?
Yes, it was an increase on the per pupil amount, so the amount of funding that we receive for each student is the number that actually got adjusted and increased. And so based on the number of students that every district has, that's what's going to determine how much funding they're going to get. And
how is it determined how you're going to spend the money? Who decides? How is it decided, and where do you go from there?
Well, there's a process at every district. We have what we call meet and confer groups, so we're not a union state here in Arizona, but we do have meet and confer groups, which are the 3 different employee groups that we have. So you have the teachers, who are all certified. You have your education support professionals, our classified staff, and then you have the administration. So the 3 different employee groups work along with the district administration and with the governing board to bring forward recommendations, and then the governing board ultimately makes a decision on how those funds are going to be invested back into the education for that community.
And the governing board has already made those decisions?
Yes, those decisions have all been made. The budgets for next year officially get adopted before July 15th, so those meetings are still taking place right now. But for the most part, those decisions have been made on how to invest those funds.
In general, how much of those funds will be invested by way of teacher salaries?
A large portion of them actually are going to go towards teacher salaries. It's been one of the primary issues for many districts, although it's not the only issue. The cut that we received for inflation wasn't the only cut that we took during the recession, and many of the other cuts that occurred during the recession still haven't been restored. So districts have some other needs that they also needed to get addressed, and so that's going to vary by district. But with a lot of my counterparts that I talk to, a lot of the CFOs I talk to, there's been a heavy emphasis on teachers' compensation.
What else would the money be spent on?
Well, another thing that we need is educational resources, textbooks. So one of the other areas we've been cut in significantly is capital. Basically, right now we get about $77 per student to cover all of our capital needs. And those capital needs include things like the student's desk, their chair, their textbook, their technology, everything that you need for a student. You're only getting $77 a year for it. And so because of that, districts haven't adopted new textbooks in 12 years, and the standards have changed 3 times since then. So you're asking the teacher, this textbook was developed for a different standard, keep trying to make it work for this new standard, even though it's not written exactly the same. Just try to find a way to make this textbook work, simply because we haven't had the funds to be able to do that. Some of the other areas, people have cut some of the elective programs, the special area programs, things like art, music, PE, the things that really enhance the learning experience. Those have taken significant cuts during the recession as well. And so people are also looking to try to make some restoration in those areas.
I know that there are some out there that are concerned that some of this, if not most of this money, would go to administration. How much goes to administration?
Well, I can speak specifically for Kyrene. I'll tell you that many districts are taking a similar approach. First, when you're working with all 3 of the employee groups, you want to honor and respect every employee that helps make the district great. Everywhere from the custodian, the facilities tech, to the teachers, to the principals, everyone in there who's contributing to make it be a great learning environment for our students. And so you typically try to do increases that are mostly in line between the 3 employee groups. That being said, a lot of districts have done other things to give additional compensation increases to the teachers. For instance, in Kyrene, one of the things that we've done is we've added 2 additional contract days for the teacher. Now, that doesn't make their per day cost, their per day reimbursement go up, but what it does do is their annual salary is now increased, and those 2 extra days are non-student contact days, so it allows more time for them to do some professional development and planning.
But there is extra, some of this money will be going to administration.
Yes.
Do we have a percentage, just a vague ballpark kind of a figure for Kyrene?
I would say in Kyrene, administration overall represents about 6.7% of our total spending. So I would say roughly about that same amount would be going towards compensation for administration.
Last question, very quickly here. Critics say more money does not equal better results when it comes to education. Respond to that, please.
Well, I think it depends on how you use the money. I would say definitely if you're just going to throw money at a problem, it's not going to solve it. But when you look at some of the critical needs that we've had and some of the things that have been reduced over these past few years, things like full-day kindergarten, the state now only pays for a half-day program when it's proven that a full-day kindergarten program is needed in order to meet the move-on reading requirements that are put into place for 3rd grade. Things like all of our capital needs. We have degrading facilities because of all the different cuts that have taken place with capital, not just with the soft capital, the smaller items you're thinking of like desk and chairs, but even the building renewal items have been cut. All those items do need to be addressed, and while addressing them may not automatically show you an immediate impact on achievement, ignoring them definitely will show a detriment on achievement.
All right. Jeremy, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ted.
Recent reports show an increase in the use of social media for news content. This as traditional newspapers continue to decline. For more on this, we welcome Jessica Pucci, an ethics and excellence professor at practice at ASU's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication and a specialist in data analysis and audience engagement. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's define terms. Give me a definition, social media.
Social media is any digital network that allows people around the world and in small communities and families and friends to connect.
And so how are people getting news from social media?
People are getting news from social media more than they ever have in the history of social media. People are sharing stories with each other, with their friends and their families, and more importantly, publishers of news, newsrooms themselves, and individual journalists have really joined the social media bandwagon and are now really making very strong efforts to share their news in social media networks.
So why are more people opting for social media to get their news?
It's an interesting question because, you know, we really saw, we've seen a big shift in the way people consume their news. So it used to be you got your news from your neighbors, from your family, from your friends. And then as journalism really operationalized itself, you saw the emergence of journalists as gatekeepers and journalists really curating for their audiences what was important to know. So it wasn't just your friend telling you what was important and what was going on in the town square that you needed to know. It was somebody who was trained in news judgment. And it really became a true profession to understand and digest and share the news. And now we've kind of come full circle, and we have you know, journalists, of course, being the gatherers and you know, creators of deliverable news, but now we have individuals, your family, your friends, the same people who you are associating with on social networks also being gatekeepers. So now you have not only trained journalists having that gatekeeping responsibility, but now your friends and family are the gatekeepers, because on social media we are all equal. My Facebook account is the same as yours and is the same as my mom's and my grandma's. So they're able to share news that they deem worthy with me, as are, you know, news operations. They're able to share news in the same way.
With that in mind, what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages of everyone getting their news, their information, important and otherwise, from social media, from Facebook and Google?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's tricky because Facebook last week actually announced a major change to its algorithm, which in which Facebook kind of reasserted its commitment to prioritizing the posts of friends and family within your network. So no longer is it that you know, a business, a news organization, or say a clothing company or a restaurant, no longer can their message necessarily trump that of, say, you know, your aunt or your best friend. So, you know, these posts, when we share news, they are weighed the same. And so when I share news, you may get it, you know, in the same way that a restaurant may share their news. So really, it puts everybody on a level playing field.
But everyone is not on a level playing field in terms of developing and creating original content.
Indeed.
Talk about the dynamics there, because the gatekeepers, if the gatekeepers aren't making money, and they aren't, print media has, for a very long time, has been in decline. A new Pew Center research study shows no difference here at all. What happens to the originators of content?
We are in a tough position. We have to be better than ever. We have to use the ethical foundations of journalism, those being truth and accuracy and fairness, to truly be the best curators and seekers and reporters of news. These are things that non-journalists have not been trained to do. So we have to really embrace the skills that we've been taught and the skills that we've developed as a journalistic profession to truly shape this content to deliver it in, theoretically, a better way than Joe Schmo with a Facebook account can.
So, the impact on the future of journalism. If social media is here to stay, and I think Facebook's got a pretty good future. I think they're going to be around for a while.
I think so.
Yeah. With that in mind, what happens to journalism?
Journalism, I think, continues on a similar trajectory in which we embrace social networks as storytelling platforms. We know that people are consuming news on a print newspaper less than ever. Similar trend in radio. We know that people are turning to digital mediums, especially social networks, for their news. So we need to embrace that as journalists and use the special nuances of social networks as unique platforms for storytelling. So that is sharing stories not just on a website and then linking to that in Facebook, but actually using Facebook's image platforms and carousels as storytelling properties. We also know from that Pew Media report that younger audiences are turning to more visual social networks such as Instagram and Snapchat. And so those are wonderful opportunities for journalists to not only tell stories, but to tell them live as they're unfolding. And we are poised to do that as journalists who can collect facts and distribute them right away.
All right. It's a brave new world out there.
It is.
Good to have you here. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining us. America's relationship with the coyote is long and storied and continues to evolve in a variety of ways. A new book titled Coyote America, A Natural and Supernatural History, looks at the coyote's unique place in America. The book's author, University of Montana Professor Emeritus Dan Flores, will be at Changing Hands Bookstore in Tempe later this evening. Dan Flores joins us now, right here on Arizona Horizon. Good to have you here.
It's great to be in Arizona.
Well, I'll bet, the coyote expert, I guess. This is such a fun book. This is so interesting. What is a coyote? Is it a dog? Is it a wolf? Is it something of its... Well, define a coyote.
Well, you know, a coyote actually is a wolf. I mean, it comes from the canid family that evolved here in the Southwest about 5 million years ago. I mean, they became distinctive animals about 1 million years ago, but they're closely related enough to wolves that they're actually able to interbreed with some species of wolves, the wolves of the East and the South in particular.
And unlike wolves, unlike dogs, they can't be tamed, correct?
They did not ever choose domestication. That's correct.
Why is that? What happened?
Well, I think they figured out a long time ago. They've been living around humans for 15,000 years, and they figured out that they could coexist in our midst and sort of reap all the benefits of our presence without ever having to surrender their freedom.
Yeah, to deal with us personally.
Absolutely.
I think I can understand the coyote's concern there. Where are coyotes found?
Well, they were originally found in the American West, but starting about 125 years ago, they began to expand out of the West, and so now they're in every state in the Union. They colonized, with the exception of Hawaii, and some of us think that they're probably in the act of stowing away to Hawaii right now, but they colonized their 49th state, Delaware, in 2010.
And from Central Park, they've been found in Central Park to a commuter train in Oregon.
That's correct.
I mean, how come they have spread so easily, so fast?
Well, they've spread primarily for two reasons. One is that we eliminated the competition, we humans did, when we began to extirpate wolves across the South and the East. That opened up a niche for a mid-sized predator. But one of the things that set them in motion really has been our war of extermination against them. Starting in the 1920s, we really, after wolves were taken care of, we really tried to do our best to wipe them off the face of the continent. And that act set in motion some evolutionary adaptations they have that basically spread them and caused them to colonize across the entire continent.
Give us some of those adaptations. What were they?
Well, one of them is the ability to vary their litter size when they're under pressure. Under normal circumstances, coyotes basically will rise to a population level and it stays pretty stable. But when they're pressured, they began to increase their litter size from an average of about 5 or 6 pups to as many as 17, 18, 19 pups.
Interesting. And you're also right, a characteristic of a coyote is that they can function alone or they can function in groups. That's relatively unusual, isn't it?
It's so unusual that only a handful of species around the world of mammal species are able to do that. We happen to be one of the other mammal species that can do that. But biologists call this fission fusion, and it's the ability to either cooperate as groups and live as social groups, or as conditions warrant, to basically go it alone or as pairs. And coyotes can do that very well.
As far as the history of the coyote and the history of the relationship with man, I mean, everything from the tricksters of American Indian folklore to, I mean, ranchers wanting no part. I mean, talk to us about that relationship with man.
Well, it's an old relationship. It goes back 15,000 years, and for probably 10,000 years, for native people in the American West in particular, coyotes basically served as a deity figure. I mean, they kind of picked them out among all the animals of the Pleistocene period 10,000 years ago as this figure that they thought was most like humans. Since that time, since European Americans came to the continent, it's been something more like a war against coyotes.
Yeah, but it's a war that, as you mentioned, they have adapted to.
It's a war basically that we can't win. I mean, we've tried to win it for a long time, but it's become now kind of a war of ideology rather than science. Most of the people who are in charge of, at Wildlife Services, for example, the arm of the federal government that is responsible for taking out coyotes on behalf of agriculture, they realize that this is not a winnable war, but they've persisted with the strategy of taking them out anyway.
And how dangerous or how expensive, costly, if you will, are coyotes to ranchers? Because they seem like they're the number one, they call them coyotes.
They do, and one of the things I do in the book, as you know, is to sort of run to ground this two different pronunciations of the animal's name. And it's almost a political determination as to how people pronounce the name. People who shoot them and kill them and poison them generally call them coyotes, though. And I mean, the animal, no question, is it's a detriment in some respects to agriculture. But what a lot of people who are advocates of coyotes want to see us do in this war we can't win by killing them is to adopt non-lethal control methods.
And give us an example.
Well, the use of herd dogs, the use of fencing, bringing sheep in instead of letting them range across the landscape, and keeping shepherds and herders close by.
You write that the coyote is us. Explain that.
I do. I think that their evolutionary adaptations so closely mirror ours that we've got a lot that we can learn from them. They, I think, have served as avatars for us in the Indian deity figure, and in things in forms like Wile E. Coyote on the cartoons on Saturday morning, because we recognize our similarities.
And you write as well that they not only adapt, but they cope. And the way they deal with stress and anxiety and these sorts of things, very familiar.
Very familiar to the things we do. And so I argue in Coyote America that confronting the kind of future that we have, where we're worried about global climate change, for example, coyotes have gone through major climate changes in North America at least 2 or 3 times. And so they're worth a close look.
Well, they're worth a close look, but you also write, and it's well known, there are some coyotes out there that just viscerally people don't like. I mean, they don't like the way they look. They think they're kind of sneaky. They're kind of skinny. They're kind of, you know what I'm saying? I mean, there's a visceral reaction, isn't there?
There is. Mark Twain sort of gave us that image of the coyote as a slinking, despicable little character, a little wretch, he called them. And a lot of people still think of them that way. But I tend to think of them as, seeing one as something like seeing the moons of Jupiter or watching whales breach the surface. This is something we ought to be appreciating as the wild in our lives.
And we're seeing a coyote howling there. You write that the original national anthem of North America is that howl.
That's what I think.
Yeah, the yipping and the howling and everything.
Exactly.
Did I tell you the coyote ran off with one of my golf clubs once?
That's a great story.
Yeah, yeah. I thought it was a big stick and started running around. I'll tell you later. This is a great book. This must have been a lot of fun to write and a lot of fun to research. It's good to have you here, and good luck at Changing Hands. And thank you for stopping by. We
Thank you very
appreciate it.
much. You bet.
Wednesday on Arizona Horizon, a debate between Republican candidates running to succeed Matt Salmon in Arizona's 5th Congressional District, a Congressional 5 debate. That's at 5:30 and 10 on the next Arizona Horizon. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. A coyote did try to run away with my driver. I kid you not. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.